Right, so I'm Catherine, and I just wanted to share my story today of equality and perspective. These beautiful slides have been obviously put together by Salesforce and the Office of Equality. And I took these slides, I looked through them, and they're really great slides to begin with, don't get me wrong on that. But I think it's always, when you're talking about equality, it's always a personal story. And that's something that I wanted to share my perspective with you today. So without further ado, I'm Catherine. So I'm the Year Dreaming Vice Chair, and I hope to see all of you there next year in June. I'm also the newest Amsterdam User Group Lead. So I really love it, and thank you all for being here tonight. I'd also love if you could give me some feedback on how I'm doing. So you can tweet at me at Catherine Kloster. I have a little bit of a funny name, so you might want to jot it down now. And then, of course, you can also loop in Salesforce Equality and hashtag Be a Motivator, or BAM. Okay, so today's agenda, I'm going to start off with my equality story. And then we're going to start to talk about some of the details of the presentation. So inclusive leadership practices. And I hope my story, I sort of mix the two together and apply some of those principles. And then we'll conclude a little bit. In between, we're going to do a little activity. And then we're going to talk about the business impact of equality, because actually, when you add up the numbers, it kind of makes sense. So it's something that we should continue to do and think about every day. And then finally, we'll summarize and go with a call to action. All right. So my equality story starts about 5 years ago. And I've been volunteering with an organization called the Safe Spaces Foundation. And that's based in the slums of Nairobi. And I had always been doing remote support for the group. So I had been helping with fundraising, I had been helping with admin stuff and reporting, because the people on the ground, they're doing really important work, and they always don't have time to do that stuff. So I was helping in that way. And so just to give you a little bit of background on Safe Spaces, it currently supports about 1,200 girls living in extremely vulnerable conditions. So things like rape and prostitution and physical and mental abuse are unfortunately commonplace for a lot of these girls living in this situation. So what Safe Spaces does is they give a physical safe space for these girls, but they also give opportunities. So they give opportunities like scholarships to go to school. They have wonderful vocational programs like computer literacy. They have programs like car mechanics, which that's my favorite program out of all of them. And they also have a lot of programs that focus on becoming more self-confident and being able to stick up for yourself and really become a leader. So this program, when I heard about it the first time, I completely fell in love with it, and I had been working with them for about 3 years. And then last year, I had the opportunity to go there. So I was super excited, and I was planning all these things along with the team that I went with. And that's where my equality story really begins. So the founder and director of Safe Spaces, her name is Penina, and she happened to be in the Netherlands a couple of weeks before my trip. So I thought, great, let's set up a meeting, and I want to go through some things so that when I'm there, everything will go great. So we had a meeting, and one of the things about the slums is that it's massive. And so some of the girls, they need to take the bus to get there. And this is the bus. It's called the Matatu. It's Lots, like very loud hip hop music comes out of this, so it's an experience, let's put it that way. So I had a meeting with Penina, and I said, how much does a round trip ticket for one person cost? And she couldn't really give me an answer. And I was like, okay, well, let's move on to something else. And my questions tended to be finance-related questions. How much does this cost? How much does this cost? How many of this do we need? How many of that do we need? And then I could tell that she was getting pretty upset. And she eventually broke down crying. And so I'm sitting there like, okay, all right, there's a huge disconnect here. And then she looked at me and she said, you don't understand my world. And that's probably the worst thing that you can hear. And you know, if you were visiting a customer or a client or even with your coworker, if someone says that to you, it's pretty heavy. And what I realized at that point, so basically a wall went up between us. And what I realized is that my unconscious bias, my perspective in that situation made me realize that this question is actually pretty irrelevant. And that's because it depends. So I took this picture. So it was raining today. And that was kind of the same rain shower that happened on this day. And as you can see, there was massive flooding in the slums. So it depends on the weather conditions of that day, how much that bus ticket is going to cost. It depends on where you want to go, where you're coming from, because there's no route to the bus. It just kind of goes along. And if everybody else that's already on the bus is going in the same direction, it's going to be you're going to get a deal. But if not, it's going to be more expensive. And then it can also depend on things like your gender and your age and your ethnic group. So factoring all these things in, that's why she really couldn't say it's going to be €1 round trip. And I think the takeaway for me was really, okay, if I want to talk about things with her that are important to me, so being the person that does the reporting, and I need to tell all of the other sponsors that are working with safe spaces what's going on and how much things cost and stuff like that, numbers are important to me. But for them, for the people that are on the ground, actually the story is more important. So if I don't take the time to understand their perspective, to understand the reality of the situation, we're never going to see the same answer. And so these are just a few more pictures of what I saw. And I realized that, you know, this is life there. And it can change in a second. And yeah, like I mentioned, if you don't put yourself in their shoes and you don't question yourself constantly, do I see this from their perspective? Yeah, you're going to have trouble with numbers. So what I learned from this is me. And this is actually so this is Penina, right here. And she's an amazing woman in her own right. I'll talk about her another time. And these are the three office workers that I worked with, and together we did some really awesome things, collecting some great data on all of the girls in the program. But I wouldn't be able to do that work or continue any work that I do today without continually having those brave conversations and putting myself out there and having Penina and other members in the foundation putting themselves out there to say, okay, this is the reality and this is where we can find a common ground. And practice those inclusive meetings. For starters, not having anyone cry at the meeting is always a good thing. So, you know, making sure that when everybody comes together at the table, that, that they feel that all of them is there, not just they didn't leave anything at the door. And finally, lead with equality. And this is something that might seem difficult, but I'm going to save that one for the next half of my presentation. But it is actually easier than you think to do in practice, just by remembering a few things and changing the way that you think. Okay, so I talked about leading with equality. We're going to do a small activity now, but I'm going to first. I'm going to go first with this question. So, what is something about myself that you might all find surprising? So, when I was 10, I was sent home with a note from the nurse saying that I had failed my hearing exam. And I always wanted glasses, so I brought home the wrong piece of paper. So I was upset about that, but then I really didn't know what that meant until lots of doctor's appointments later, I lost about 40% of my hearing suddenly. And then subsequently spent the next 20 years hiding that part of me, which is actually a huge part of me. So I have a funny accent. Nobody can really place where I am from. I'm actually from Buffalo, New York. I do not have a Buffalo, New York accent, but that's because I have hearing loss. But the thing is, if the fire alarm were to go off right now, all of you would get up and walk outside, and I would think, oh, you don't like me. Okay, I did a bad job. But in fact, it's because I can't hear the fire alarm. So it's actually really important for all of you to know that I can't do that for my own personal safety. But I always felt that there was such a huge stigma against hearing loss that people would say, oh, she's deaf, so she can't do this and this and this. And that's actually not the case. I'm a pretty high-functioning person. So I'm going to leave it there. What I would like you to do is with one of your neighbors, left, right, up, down, whatever, if you're comfortable, share something about yourself that others might find surprising, or you can talk about a time where you felt that you had to leave a bit of yourself at the door, or a time of inequality or equality. I'll give you, how much time do we have?
As much time as you need.
About 2.5 minutes each.
That sounds perfect.
Okay, go for it. Groups of 3 are fine. I think there was some good stories going on back and forth, so thank you for sharing. We just have a few more slides, and then there's some swag, so you just have to hang in there. You might think, wow, going back to the leading with equality, this is a lot. So now I have to start remembering all of these things about everyone. But that's not the case. It's actually just changing the way that you approach things to begin with. So, for example, in my case, please turn on your webcam and remind everyone when you start the meeting to turn on your webcam. It might be shifting the hour of the meeting so that people with children can pick them up or drop them off from daycare and school. And it might be even using a specific color on the whiteboard and not using a specific color on the whiteboard. So it's about thinking as a leader from an equality perspective, from a diversity perspective. And I really love this slide because I think it sums it up nicely. Continuing to have those brave conversations every day in your meetings and your interactions with customers and clients and your colleagues. And we sum it up very nicely. Listen with empathy. Tell your story. You need to be vulnerable in order for others to be as vulnerable. Create a culture of transparency. Encourage healthy discourse. The thing about equality doesn't mean that we are the same. It means that as somebody who really values equality, you also value the perspective that that individual brings to the table. And my favorite, emphasize accountability. I love that. And also forgiveness. I think from my perspective, that's something that I'm always working on. So we really focus on the first three of the 5 inclusive leadership practices. So lead with equality, have brave, authentic conversations, and practice inclusive meetings. The slides that will go around also have a lot of information on being fair in assignments and promotion, and celebrate and bond with everyone in mind. So I do encourage you to take a look at those. There are some nice videos in there as well. But we are running out of time, so I'll keep moving. Okay, this is the last set, business impact of equality. So if you're in doubt whether this makes sense, maybe in the back these might, actually, it's pretty good. But if you can't see it again, the slides will go around. The purpose of this slide is just to show that companies that are more diverse, both from a gender perspective and from an ethnicity perspective, have a 21 and 33 respective chance of having higher or above average profitability. So if you are a leader or in a position of leadership, or you will be in the future, keep these numbers in mind. And same thing goes for creating an inclusive culture. Okay, so it says percentage of employees who agree or disagree with the following statements and say they feel empowered to perform their best work. So you can see that the blue lines are agree, and they're consistently bigger across the board without looking into the details of the numbers. So you're going to do a better job at work if you feel like your voice is heard. If you feel that you belong at your company, you're able to be your authentic self, and your company focuses on fostering an inclusive culture and cares about closing the gender pay gap. So again, if you're in a position of leadership, this makes a lot of sense to apply these things. But if you're not, but actually I'll take that back because everybody is a leader, you can see that creating an inclusive culture makes sense. So again, please take just even a few minutes to take a deeper dive at this. There's also a link to the Salesforce Equality Report. And of course, there's obviously a badge opportunity at the end of this. So continue your journey with Trailhead, and you can follow the link here to the Equality Trail. And finally, the summary and call to action. Remember, we all have unconscious bias. The most important thing is the first step is to acknowledge that you have that, and consistently question yourself, ask for feedback, and make sure that you're reflecting on the experiences that you have. Brave, authentic conversations, break down barriers, listen, be transparent, share your story. And my favorite again, emphasize accountability and forgiveness. Use the 5 inclusive leadership practices consistently. I mean, I think it's something that you should print out, put in your cubicle, make it your lock screen on your phone, do whatever you have to do to keep reminding yourself of those principles. And yeah, the business impact is there. Inclusive cultures positively impact many companies' profitability and productivity. So a few additional interesting articles. Thank you, Paul. And thank you.